Hey everybody. Remember, don't get it right, get it written. Use your writing as learning, so don't wait until you know what to write before you write. Start writing, and that'll help you know what you need to write. This is going to be an introduction to validity and reliability, but before we do that, we got to do a couple other things first. Remember that the definition of a hypothesis is a formal statement of the predicted outcome, and also that it's testable with data. And we talked about that already, but what we haven't talked about, right, is that there are different kinds of hypotheses. And the first kind's really important and will become more important when we talk about how we're analyzing data later in the semester. The null hypothesis is that there's no significant differences or relationships between groups or variables. The null hypothesis is always that everything is equal, that taking this drug will be no better than not taking a drug or taking a sugar pill, or that therapy A is no better than therapy B, that everything's the same. Everyone's the same height. All therapies are the same. All therapies are the same as no therapy, that there's no difference between anything. And usually, researchers are going to try to reject the null hypothesis, right? They're going to try to say, no, therapy A is better than therapy B, or drug A is better than drug B, or better than no drug, or no therapy, right? So we're usually trying to reject the null hypothesis when we're doing research. And then we have a research hypothesis. And a research hypothesis will state that there will be significant differences or relationships between groups or variables. Again, researchers are usually trying to prove that there is a difference, right, between one thing and another. There are two kinds of research hypotheses. One is directional, so that you're going to say which one will be more, will be better, will be whatever. So directional, Prozac will improve mood more than a placebo pill. And you can also have a non-directional research hypothesis in which you state that one of them will be better than the other, but you don't know yet which one it will be. So there will be a difference between the mood in people who take Prozac versus people who take a placebo, but you're not identifying the direction. One of the key terms that we'll be talking about this semester, especially as you write your literature review and your methods section especially, is operationalize or operationalism. And this is an old term, almost 100 years old now. And in the early 1900s, in psychology, you had to, the idea was that if you couldn't measure something, you weren't even allowed to write about it or talk about it. So that if you had an idea but you couldn't measure it, it wouldn't be published anywhere. And so operationalizing terms is to define the meaning of terms in accordance with the conditions of their measurement. So how are you going to measure, right? So you couldn't say that people who take Prozac will improve their mood over people who take a placebo, right? Because they would say, well, you need to operationalize the term mood. So in order to do that, you'd have to say how you're going to measure it. So people who take Prozac will have higher scores on the Smith Mood Inventory 2015 than will people who do not take Prozac, right? So we've got to operationalize, especially our dependent variables have to be operationalized, and other things as well, right? You can't just say that people will have average IQ. You would have to say that, people will score between an 85 and a 115 on the Wechsler test of intelligence. All right. You've got to define the meaning of terms by how you're going to measure those things. Now we're going to spend some time talking about validity and different types of validity. So validity is how accurately something measures what it's supposed to measure. It has an intended purpose for what it's measuring, um, and that test or thing allows us to draw conclusions. And that validity is really about truthfulness. Are we truly measuring what we say we're measuring? Um, One thing that I like to talk about is the PPVT, which is the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. And that is a test where you show somebody a page, and on that page it has 4 pictures. And it might be a woman running, a woman sleeping, a woman eating, and a woman working, let's say. And you show that to a child or an adult, and you say, show me the woman is running, and the child has to point to the right one. Well, for a long time people would accept that test as an IQ test, but it's not an IQ test. It's only measuring receptive vocabulary, right? It only measures what words the child knows. And so it's not a valid IQ test, it's only a valid receptive vocabulary test. The first kind of validity we're going to talk about is face validity. And face validity is how well a test appears to accomplish its purpose. It's really based on judgment, and it's based on the average person's judgment, right? So if you were giving a child an articulation test and the parent was watching, the parent would say, it looks like they are assessing my child's speech. They're asking her to make different sounds. They're writing down the sounds. They're recording them. On its face, it looks like an articulation test. Now we move to content validity, and this is a little bit more of a formal approach. Content validity refers to the completeness of the test, and it's the completeness to the test from the point of view of a practicing professional. So, if you were the speech therapist and you were measuring a child's language skills, you know, is it sampling from the spectrum of skills, right? Is it looking at the child's language, their expressive language and the receptive language? Is it looking at syntax, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, right? Is it looking at everything it needs to look at for you to say, yes, all the content is there that needs to be there. It's measuring what it says it's measuring. All right, so now we get to an even more formal approach, and this is construct validity. And this refers to a test's ability to measure theoretical constructs. So, and a construct is an attribute, proficiency, ability, or skill that's defined by established theories, right? So we could be talking about language ability, speech ability, things like that. All right, so face validity is the average person would say yes. It looks like that's a speech test or that's a language test, right? Content validity is that a practicing speech language pathologist would say yes, all the content is there. This looks like this has good content validity because it appears to be a complete language test. It's assessing everything it needs to assess. Construct validity looks at, okay, within what it's assessing, is it assessing it based on what we know in theory, right? So that are we measuring semantics in a way that has been shown through research to be an established, useful, measurable way to measure semantics, or have we just made something up in terms of how to measure it? So construct validity is going to be, you know, um, researchers or clinicians with a lot of experience in research looking at the test, looking at the individual items on the test within the content to say, are they measuring this the right way? Are they measuring semantics the right way? Are they measuring morphology the right way? So whether we're talking about overall English language proficiency, emotional maturity, right? These are constructs. They exist in theory and have been observed to exist in practice. And again, are we testing these things in a way that has been shown to be a valid way to test what we're testing? Now we move on to a little bit of a different kind of validity. Um, Face validity, content validity, construct validity, right, are all things that are looking at within the test itself. Um, is the test itself valid with the contents and what's there? Um, Criterion validity establishes validity by using an external criterion outside of the test itself. And we've got two types of criterion validity. We've got concurrent validity and predictive validity. Concurrent validity is when a new measure is compared to a widely accepted standard. So if you want to come up with a new measure of preschool language abilities, the widely accepted standard is really the preschool language scale, the PLS. So if you have a new test of preschool language abilities, they're going to measure your test against the PLS to see are you getting the same answers for the kids who take, so the kids will take the PLS and then the kids will also take your test. Are they coming up with the same diagnosis, right? If someone has a mild expressive language disorder on your test, do they also come up with a mild expressive language disorder on the PLS? If yes, that's probably a good thing. If not, you're going to have to come up with a reason why. Maybe you're doing a better, more accurate job measuring, but maybe you're not. So you'd have to come up with a good reason why. Now, right, if everything comes up exactly the same, you get the same diagnosis for 99% of the kids, if they come up with a mild language disorder on the other test and your test, everything's the same. Well, if your test is more expensive than the PLS and takes longer to give, right, no one's going to buy your test. No one will want it. But if your test is cheaper than the PLS and your test takes half as long and you get all the same information as the PLS, right, you're going to be a preschool language millionaire because everybody will want to use your test, and it's now the gold standard. Predictive validity, on the other hand, is a test's ability to predict performance. So if you're doing the preschool language scale, right, how well does your test predict a child's ability to enter kindergarten? How well does it predict a child's ability to be able to learn to read? How well does it predict a child's ability, right, to be able to do all the academic things that a lot of that test will measure? So can it predict actual performance based on the test? Now let's talk about reliability. Reliability is about the consistency of scores. It's about the ability to produce the same score over repeated testing or across different raters. Reliability is a measurement of variability between repeated administrations or observations, right? So if you did create a new language test and a child takes it on Monday and has a moderate language disorder and takes it on Friday and they have above average language skills, that test is not reliable and it's worthless then. You don't know which one's right or even if either of them are right. Right, so reliability, getting the same scores over and over again. And this is important because there's almost always measurement error. And it could be due to lots of things. It could be due to the test taker's motivation, fatigue, mood, etc. Right? If you're working with a child with attention deficit disorder and they've been doing really well all semester, and then they come in the last day to get their post-test and they forgot to take their ADHD meds that day and they can't focus or all over the room and they tank on the test, right? It's probably not a real a true view of what their language abilities are, there's that day they did poorly, right? Or if you child who didn't sleep well the night before, child doesn't care, right? Kids aren't really going to inherently care about how well they do on these tests. So some days they might be locked in, other days they might not be locked in. So all that can vary, right? Variations in test setting. Are you doing it with other people in the room? Is it a quiet room? Um, right, that is it a noisy room? All that can impact how well we do on a test. Is the test on the computer? Is it in person? um, Variations in administration and scoring of the test, right? When you're a grad student and give a test, you're going to be really expected to, the week before, you're going to go over that test, you're going to practice that test so that you know how to give that test. Do you start at the beginning of the test for everybody, or do you start in different sections based on how old the child is? Do you give the entire test, or do you stop after the person has missed 5 questions in a row, or 5 out of 9 questions in a row, or after a certain section based on age? So, right, has it been given correctly? And then also scoring of the test, right? Sometimes you'll ask children to remember something from a story that you have told that they'll then say, well, do they get full credit for what they said? Does that have enough information? Do they get half credit, partial credit? So, right, the scoring of the test is going to be an issue. And then also variation due to guessing. Sometimes you'll be giving a test to a child who you know doesn't really know or isn't really able to do what you're doing, but they happen to be pointing to the right pictures, or they happen to be getting things right, and you keep going and going, even though it's not really a true measure of where they are language skills wise. A lot of what we've been talking about is test retest reliability. Is if we give the child the same test today and then we give them the same test in 2 weeks, they should get about the same score unless we're doing some kind of intensive intervention, right? So that you should reliably get the same score unless there's been intervention or change over time. So, right, if we get all kinds of different scores from the same kids, we don't know which score is right. Maybe none of them are right. And the test is worthless. It's not worth anything if you don't know if the score is right or not, right? Now let's talk about InterObserver reliability and then IntraObserver reliability. So InterObserver, or I've always called it inter-rater reliability, is the extent to which 2 or more raters or observers, coders, examiners agree, right? So when we're thinking about this, an interstate is a road that goes across more than one states. So this is more than one person doing the rating or coding or examining, and it's to the extent to that they agree on what they're doing. So if we have a client here who stutters, maybe I'm going to come in, watch the video of the assessment. I'm going to give my rating of how many moments of stuttering they had during the session. Another person will watch the same videotape. They'll give their rating of how many moments of stuttering happened. We'll compare notes. Did we agree? Did we disagree? If we agreed, we're probably good to go. If we did not agree, we got to figure out why. Maybe come up with some rules for what is a moment of stuttering, what's not a moment of stuttering, and just a normal disfluency that maybe we won't count. And then we're going to do it again until we agree on the score, right? Because if we get different scores, we don't know who's right. So we can't go with one or the other. We've got to get reliability, or you don't know what the right answer is. Finally, we've got intra-observer reliability, or I've always called it intra-rater reliability, and that's where we have the consistency in ratings given by the same person across multiple instances. So I may watch that speech therapy session. I'll count moments of stuttering today. And then maybe 1 week or 2 weeks later, I'll come back, watch the same video, do another count, and make sure that I'm reliable and consistent across the times I rated. Because again, if I have two different scores, I don't know which one's right. I can't assume either of them are right until I'm getting reliable ratings. So now I'm going to ask you which one of these is true, and only one of these is true. Can you have reliability without having validity, or can you have validity without having reliability? Think about that, and we'll talk about it in class.